They say when you move somewhere new, you get to reinvent yourself. I used to believe that. In the summer of 2011, Claire and I packed what was left of our marriage into a rented U-Haul and drove across the bridge into Maplewood, New Jersey. The cul-de-sac we landed on had everything we thought we needed. Quiet streets, well-trimmed lawns, and the kind of neighbors who waved when you drove by. It felt safe. Safe was something we hadn't felt in a long time. Claire and I were still reeling from the miscarriage. It had been almost a year, but the wound never closed. She carried it in her silence, in the way she kept herself buried in work at the hospital. I carried it in the late-night shifts at the printing company, in the way I found excuses not to come home until Ethan was already asleep. Ethan, 7 years old with his mop of brown hair and boundless energy, was the only thing tethering us to each other. But even he could sense the cracks. "You'll like it here," Claire said as we unpacked boxes the first night. "It's a new start." Her voice was hopeful, but her eyes were tired. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. The first time we met Margaret was the next morning. She appeared at our doorstep with a basket of blueberry muffins, wearing a floral apron like she'd stepped out of some 1950s sitcom, mid-40s, sharp bob haircut, and a smile that seemed just a little too polished. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice bright. "You're exactly the kind of family this street needs." Claire beamed, grateful for the warmth. I shook Margaret's hand and noticed how long she held on, her grip firm, her eyes locked on mine. Ethan peeked from behind my leg and Margaret bent down. "And you must be Ethan, what a handsome boy." She reached out to pat his shoulder, but he pulled back slightly. I laughed it off, thinking he was just shy. Within days, Margaret became a fixture in our lives. She offered to watch Ethan while Claire worked double shifts and I dragged through late nights at the shop. She baked pies and left them on our porch. She watered our plants when we forgot. From the outside, she was the perfect neighbor, the kind you brag about at barbecues. But even then, little cracks showed. Ethan once tugged on my sleeve before bed and whispered, "Dad, she looks at my window at night." I chuckled, told him it was probably just the shadows, or maybe he'd had a bad dream. But the way his eyes stayed wide, unblinking, made something cold stir in my chest. One night, while hauling the trash cans to the curb after midnight, I caught a glimpse of movement in her window. She was there, standing still behind the curtain, just watching our house. The second I froze, the light flicked off. I shook my head, told myself I was tired, that long shifts were messing with me. But some part of me knew what I saw. Claire brushed it off. "She's just friendly," she said when I mentioned it. "Don't turn this into something it's not." And maybe she was right. Maybe I was the one making ghosts out of shadows. But even as I tried to believe her, Ethan's words echoed in my head. "She stares at my window at night." It was late July when things turned. The heat hung heavy that summer, the kind that made the nights restless and the air sticky. Claire and I had been arguing more than ever. Money, schedules, the same old resentments that never seemed to fade. Ethan started sleeping with the hallway light on, something he hadn't done since he was 5. When I asked why, he just shrugged. "She's out there," he whispered once. I didn't press. One night around 3 a.m, Claire shook me awake. "Someone's in the yard," she whispered. I groaned, half asleep, but then I saw her face, pale, tight with fear. I pushed back the blinds. There she was, Margaret, barefoot in the grass, wearing a white nightgown that swayed in the faint breeze. She wasn't moving, just standing there, eyes locked on our living room window. The porch light caught her face, and that smile, wide, unnatural, almost proud, was painted across her lips. "What the hell?" I muttered, throwing on a t-shirt. Claire grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there." But I did. I stepped outside, the summer air thick and damp. "Margaret?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The yard was silent. She was gone. No crunch of footsteps on gravel. No sound of a gate swinging shut. Just gone. Back inside, Claire's voice was sharp. "You're making this worse." "What do you mean, worse?" "You're feeding into it," she snapped. "Into his fears, into whatever this is." Her eyes flicked toward Ethan's room. I realized then she thought we were both imagining things. That maybe stress, grief, exhaustion had made me see what I wanted or didn't want to see. But I knew. I knew what I saw. After that night, our house didn't feel like ours anymore. Every creak of the floor, every rustle outside put me on edge. Ethan wouldn't sleep alone. Claire buried herself deeper into work, pulling double shifts that left her too exhausted to talk. When we did speak, it always turned into an argument. "You're paranoid," she said one night after I caught Margaret's silhouette in her window again. "And you're blind," I shot back. "She's watching us, Claire. She's watching him." "Do you hear yourself?" She slammed a glass down on the counter. "We've been through hell already, and now you want to invent more monsters?" "It's not invented," I said, my voice low. "I see it, he sees it, why can't you?" She didn't answer, she just turned away, shoulders tense. For a moment I hated her for not believing me. Margaret didn't let up. She waved cheerfully whenever she saw us outside. That smile as flawless as ever. She brought over casseroles, cookies, pies. Each time Claire accepted them with polite thanks. I couldn't touch them. They sat in the kitchen untouched until they went stale. The worst part was Ethan. He stopped riding his bike outside. He stopped playing in the yard. One night I caught him sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at the window. "Buddy, what are you doing?" I asked gently. "Waiting," he whispered. "For what?" "For her." My chest tightened. I pulled the blind shut, tucked him in, promised he was safe. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. It all broke one evening in early August. The cul-de-sac was lit up with flashing red and blue. Police cruisers lined the street. Claire and I stood on our porch, clutching Ethan between us as officers swarmed Margaret's house. She came out in handcuffs, that same smile plastered on her face, unbothered by the gasps of neighbors. I'll never forget it. The way she turned her head just enough to look at us as they led her to the squad car. Her eyes locked on Ethan, her smile unwavering. The news broke the next morning. Margaret had been breaking into homes at night, photographing children while they slept. The officers found stacks of photos in her basement, some dating back years. Families who thought they were safe now saw their children's faces staring back at them from evidence bags. Claire sat at the table, pale, trembling. She whispered, "I didn't believe you." I didn't answer. What was there to say? That night, Ethan woke screaming. I rushed to his room, held him as he shook. "She's still there," he cried. "She's still smiling at the window." I pulled the blinds closed tight and told him it was over. But deep down I wasn't sure. Months passed. Margaret's house stayed empty, a for sale sign drooping in the yard. Life was supposed to go back to normal. Claire and I tried. We went to therapy. We talked more, fought less. But the distance between us never fully closed. Ethan still woke from nightmares. Sometimes he'd come into our room trembling, whispering that he saw her face in the window again. I told him it was just dreams. I told him we were safe now. But when I said it, I was trying to convince myself as much as him. Every time I walked past that basket of cookies she'd given us, still untouched on the counter, I felt a chill. I should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. It felt like a reminder, like proof that we hadn't imagined it all. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself pulling back the blinds, staring at the empty yard, half expecting to see her white nightgown swaying in the dark. I tell myself she's gone, that she's behind bars, that her smile can't hurt us anymore. But some nights, when the wind rattles the windows just right, I swear I hear her laugh. Evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives with a pie, a smile, and a friendly wave. We want so badly to believe in the kindness of neighbors and the safety of our communities that we ignore the instincts telling us something is wrong. I used to think the hardest sound to live with was the echo of your own failures. Back in 2006, when Julia and I moved into that duplex on North Pine Avenue in Chicago, that sound followed us everywhere. The walls were paper thin, so every argument about money, every sigh of disappointment, carried into the next room and probably beyond. I was 38, already hollowed out by bankruptcy after my hardware store collapsed. She was 35, exhausted from working double shifts at the hospital. Our son Ethan was only 8, too young to understand bankruptcy, too young to see how thin the glue was holding us together, but old enough to feel the tension that seeped into every corner of that narrow house. When I first stepped inside that duplex, it felt temporary, like a stopgap before life got better. The living room smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was a dull brown and the radiator rattled like loose bones. But it was cheap, and cheap was what we needed. I told Julia, "It's not forever," and she nodded without looking at me. We both knew we'd said the same thing too many times already. The duplex had 2 units joined at the hip by a shared wall that ran through the living room, the bedrooms, even the kitchen. On the other side lived Mark and his daughter Sophie. He was in his late 30s, tall, with thinning hair and the kind of polite quiet that doesn't invite questions. We didn't know much about him. He worked odd hours, came and went without fanfare, nodded hello in the driveway. Sophie was 9, a thin little girl with a pink bike she rode in circles, her laughter carrying across the cracked pavement. Julia adored her instantly. "At least one kid around here smiles," she'd tease, ruffling Ethan's hair. Ethan would scowl, but even he liked Sophie. They'd wave to each other, sometimes chase each other's bikes up and down the street. Then one day she stopped appearing. I asked Mark casually one evening when we both took the trash out. "Haven't seen Sophie in a while," I said, trying to sound neighborly. He barely looked up. "She's staying with relatives out of town," he muttered. His voice was sharp, final, the kind of tone that ends a conversation before it begins. I nodded and let it drop. I didn't push. I told myself it was none of my business. It was around then the smell started. It crept in through the vents, a sweet, cloying stench that reminded me of spoiled meat mixed with something chemical. At first, I blamed the pipes or maybe a dead animal in the crawl space. Came home saying, "That smell isn't right." Sometimes when she worked late, she claimed she heard faint noises in the walls, soft crying, muffled like it was being swallowed by plaster. I told her she was overtired imagining things. Truth was, I didn't want to think too hard about it. The nights dragged on. Our fights grew sharper, our silences heavier, and all the while behind that thin wall something darker was unfolding. The night it came to a head was stormy. Rain rattling against the windows, thunder shaking the duplex like a warning. Julia was at the hospital pulling a night shift and Ethan was asleep upstairs. I sat on the couch, the TV glowing faintly, the smell stronger than ever. It burned my throat, made the back of my eyes sting. I kept telling myself I'd call the landlord about the pipes. That was when I heard it. At first it was faint, almost like the wind. But then it sharpened. A sound that froze me where I sat. Sobbing. Small, broken sobbing, coming from the shared wall of the living room. I muted the TV and pressed my ear against the plaster. My heart hammered. The sound was clearer now, shaky breaths between cries and then a whisper. "Help me." I staggered back like I'd been struck. My mouth went dry. It wasn't the pipes, it wasn't the storm. It was a child. My hands shook so hard I dropped the phone twice before dialing 911. "It's my neighbor," I stammered to the operator. There's a kid, there's someone in the wall, please send someone." The sirens came fast, their red and blue flashing across the narrow street. Officers pounded on Mark's door, shouting. He opened it calmly, like it was just another Tuesday night. While 2 officers spoke with him, others stormed the basement. I'll never forget the moment one of them shouted, "We've got her." Sophie. She was chained to a pipe, filthy, starved, her wrists raw where the metal had rubbed her skin. When the flashlight beam hit her face, she cried out, a sound that split me in half. She was alive, but barely. And upstairs, Mark sat on the couch, a bag of chips in his lap, the TV still playing. His face was blank, almost bored, as if nothing about this was unusual. They cuffed him without a struggle. He didn't say a word. I stood in the driveway, rain soaking me through, watching them carry Sophie out wrapped in a blanket. She clung to the officer like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. That night, something inside me cracked. I had been feet away, listening to my own marriage collapse, pretending not to smell the rot, pretending not to hear the cries through the wall. Julia had been right. She'd sensed it, and I had doubted her. In the weeks that followed, the duplex felt poisoned. Julia couldn't stay there. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the pipes, made her tense. She told me one morning, her voice low and flat, "I can't live here anymore. Not after this." "We can't just up and leave," I said. "I'm not asking," she replied. We moved out within 2 months, but the damage had been done. Julia couldn't forgive me for dismissing her instincts, for telling her she was imagining things while a child suffered next door. We fought more, not less, until eventually there was nothing left to fight for. A year later, she filed for divorce. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side. Julia took Ethan and moved closer to her sister. I visited on weekends, tried to be present, but the shadow of that duplex never left me. I couldn't shake Sophie's face, dirty, terrified, looking up into the flashlight like salvation. I couldn't shake the sound of her whisper through the wall. "Help me." It's been years, but the memory hasn't dulled. Whenever I hear a noise through thin walls, a neighbor's TV, a baby crying, footsteps in the hallway, I freeze. My stomach knots. My mind goes back to that night, to the smell, to the sound, to the guilt of knowing I lived just feet away while a little girl begged for help. I've told this story a few times, usually after too many drinks. People always shake their heads, horrified, say things like, "You couldn't have known." But I did know. I smelled it. I heard it. Julia told me, and I ignored her. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I had enough of my own problems. That duplex is probably rented out again now. Someone else's furniture pressed against the walls, someone else's life bleeding into the thin plaster. I wonder if they ever feel it too. That sense that walls don't just hold up a house, they hold secrets. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what lurks outside your home, but what you choose not to see inside it. Fear, pride, and denial can blind us to truths that demand action. The guilt I carry is proof that when something feels wrong, when instincts, smells, or faint cries tell you otherwise, you can't afford to dismiss it. The cost of silence is too high. Listen, trust, act, because ignoring the signs doesn't make them disappear. When I think back to 2018, it feels like the year we were supposed to finally arrive. Daniel and I had been married almost 10 years, weathered job losses, rented shabby apartments, and gone through the kind of lean years that test every part of a marriage. Buying the house on Sycamore Lane in Portland felt like we'd made it. A 2-story cedar-sided place with a backyard for Lily, our 6-year-old daughter. A mortgage that stretched us but not too far. And a quiet street where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved when you drove past. I wanted to believe the house would fix us. Daniel had just gotten a promotion at his engineering firm, the kind of job he'd worked toward for years. I had left my design firm to freelance from home so I could spend more time with Lily. From the outside, we looked steady, respectable. Inside, though, it was different. Daniel came home later and later, his eyes glued to his phone even at the dinner table. We argued in hushed tones about how absent he was, and more than once I accused him of loving his career more than his family. He'd slam the garage door and retreat into silence, leaving me alone at the kitchen sink with dishes and tears. That's when David entered the picture. Our neighbor. He lived alone in the house to the right of ours. A clean-cut man in his early 40s with sandy hair and an easy smile. From the beginning, he was the kind of neighbor you felt lucky to have. When the wind knocked down a section of our fence, he fixed it before Daniel even noticed. When my car battery died one morning, he was in my driveway with jumper cables before I had time to call roadside assistance. Always quick to wave, always asking, "Need any help today?" At first, I was just grateful. A kind neighbor, nothing more. But as the week stretched on, I realized he seemed to notice things Daniel didn't. If I looked tired, David would ask if I'd eaten lunch. If I was juggling groceries, he'd insist on carrying the heaviest bags. He filled in the empty spaces Daniel left behind, and I hated how much I looked forward to his knock on the door. Lily loved him right away. He had a way with kids, crouching down to her level, remembering the names of her stuffed animals. He'd bring her little gifts, stickers, a set of crayons, once even a small puzzle shaped like a castle. "For my little buddy," he'd say with a grin, and Lily would beam. Daniel brushed it off as neighborly kindness, but something about it unsettled me. One night, while tucking Lily into bed, she said something that froze me. "Mommy, Uncle David likes my unicorn pajamas." I frowned. When did he see them? "Last night," I waved at him. My skin prickled. Her bedroom was on the 2nd floor facing the street. There was no reason he should have known what she wore to bed. Another afternoon, I came back from the grocery store and found her toys rearranged in the living room. I knew I had locked the door when I left. My stomach twisted, but Daniel just shook his head when I told him, "You're overreacting, she probably moved them herself." His dismissal stung more than his words. I wanted him to take me seriously, to stand with me in my unease, but he didn't. Meanwhile, David kept showing up. If Daniel wasn't home, he lingered longer on the porch, asking if I needed company. His compliments became softer, personal. "You deserve someone who notices how hard you work," he said once, his eyes holding mine longer than they should. I laughed it off, though my heart pounded. The rain in Portland has a way of making nights feel endless. One evening, Daniel texted he'd be stuck at the office overnight. I tried to keep myself busy. Lily's homework, laundry, scrolling through freelance deadlines, but the house felt too quiet once she was in bed. That's when the knock came. I peered through the peephole. David stood there, rain dripping off his jacket, holding a steaming mug. His smile was warm, familiar, but something about it chilled me. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," he said softly when I opened the door a crack. "I made you some coffee." "Thanks, but I'm fine," I replied quickly, forcing a polite smile. He didn't move. He just stood there, rain falling around him, the mug still in his hand. His eyes searched mine, steady and expectant. "I've got work to finish," I said finally, my voice firmer. For a moment, his smile faltered. Then he nodded, placed the mug on the porch railing, and stepped back into the shadows. "Any time," he murmured. I locked the door and leaned against it, trembling. The house no longer felt like mine. After that night, I saw him everywhere. At the mailbox when I picked up letters, trimming his hedges when I walked to the car, leaning casually against the fence when Lily played outside. Always watching, always smiling. I started drawing the blinds more often, checking locks twice before bed. Daniel thought I was paranoid. "He's just being nice," he said, exasperated. "Not every man who talks to you is dangerous." But it wasn't just talk. One afternoon, Lily came running inside with a drawing. David had given her colored pencils and sat sketching with her on the porch. I hadn't been asked. He hadn't knocked. He'd simply inserted himself into her world, and mine. That night I told Daniel, "He's crossing boundaries. This isn't normal." Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I work 60 hours a week to keep us in this house, and you're inventing problems with the neighbor. Can we not do this?" His dismissal left me feeling more alone than ever. The breaking point came a week later. I was tucking Lily into bed when I noticed her curtains were slightly open. Across the street, David stood in his driveway, looking up at her window. Our eyes met, and instead of looking away, he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Something inside me snapped. I closed the curtains, grabbed my phone, and called a locksmith the next morning. Every lock in the house was changed. I stopped answering his knocks, stopped acknowledging his waves. When Daniel asked why, I said only, "Because he doesn't get to have a place in this house." 2 months later, we sold the home and moved. Daniel called it an overreaction, but I knew it wasn't. It was survival. Even now, 2 years later, I sometimes catch the faint smell of his cologne in crowded places. My chest tightens, and for a split second I expect to see him standing there, smiling, waiting for me to open the door. Not every danger comes crashing through the window or shouting in the night. Sometimes it's the neighbor who fixes your fence, who smiles too warmly, who notices too much. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. It can come wrapped in kindness, disguised as help. Trust the unease in your gut. Boundaries are there to protect us, and when someone keeps crossing them, it's not paranoia, it's warning. Listen to it before it's too late. When I think back to the winter of 1999, I picture peeling paint, the hum of radiators, and the smell of wet coats drying by the door. Michael and I had just graduated college, eager to start our lives but strapped for money. The apartment on Walnut Street wasn't much. 3rd floor, no elevator, kitchen tiles cracked like old teeth. But it was ours. A beginning. Michael had been accepted into law school, though to make ends meet he worked evenings at a greasy diner. His schedule was brutal. Classes during the day, bussing tables at night, collapsing into bed just as I was waking. I had landed a teaching job at an elementary school across town. It wasn't glamorous, paper-thin walls, underfunded classrooms, but it paid. Our schedules rarely overlapped. Most evenings I returned to the apartment alone, the air heavy with silence. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen, grading papers, the only sound the groan of pipes or the occasional footsteps echoing down the hallway. Marriage in those days felt less like partnership and more like passing notes between shifts. It was during one of those lonely nights that I heard it for the first time, the knocking. 3 soft taps at the door. Not loud, not hurried, almost gentle. I froze, my pen suspended over a stack of math worksheets. I waited, listening. When I finally crept to the door and peered through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I told myself it was kids playing pranks, maybe drunk tenants getting the wrong door. But the next night, it came again. Same time, 2 a.m. 3 quiet taps. And again, no one there. Soon it became ritual. I'd go to bed dreading the hour, my body tense as midnight passed. When the knocking came, my heart would hammer so loud I swore it could be heard through the walls. What chilled me most wasn't the sound itself. It was what came after. Because every time I checked the peephole across the street, the light in one particular apartment would flick off, as though someone was watching for my reaction. That apartment belonged to Mr. Harris. Harris was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. He lived alone in the building opposite ours, his window directly across from our living room. I'd seen him in the lobby a few times, tall, slightly stooped, always wearing a dark coat no matter the weather. He spoke politely enough, but something about him unsettled me. His smile lingered too long. His eyes darted to the stairwell when he asked about Michael's schedule. "Friendly guy," Michael said once, shrugging when I mentioned Harris. "Probably just lonely." Maybe, but I couldn't shake the unease, especially as the knocks continued. Always at 2 a.m., always 3 times, and always followed by that apartment light clicking off. When I finally told Michael about it, he sighed, setting his law textbook aside. "You're stressed, it's winter. The pipes make noises, don't let it get in your head." "It's not the pipes," I whispered. "It's someone at the door." He rubbed his eyes, too tired to argue. "Then ignore it. If it's kids, they'll get bored." But ignoring it didn't make it stop. If anything, the knocks grew more precise, more deliberate, as though whoever it was knew I was listening. I began to dread nights, lying awake with the sheets pulled up to my chin, counting the minutes until the inevitable sound. I started sleeping with the lamp on, a habit Michael teased me about. What I didn't tell him was that I sometimes heard faint breathing outside the door after the knocks. A presence. By February, I was jumpy during the day, snapping at students drinking too much coffee. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. One Friday, determined to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things, I dug out our old VHS camcorder. It was bulky, clunky, a graduation gift from my parents. I set it on a chair facing the front door before going to bed. My plan was simple. If the knocking came, I'd have proof. That night, right on schedule, I heard it. 3 soft taps. My body went rigid. I stayed in bed, clutching the sheets, too afraid to move. I told myself the camera was watching for me. By morning, I could barely breathe as I rewound the tape. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first, there was nothing. Just the dim hallway, the frame of our door. Then, movement. Mr. Harris. He crept into the frame like a shadow, pressing his ear against our door. He lingered there, listening. Then slowly, deliberately, he tapped 3 times with the tips of his fingers. Before leaving, he leaned close to the peephole and smiled. Not at random, directly into the lens, as if he knew. I dropped the remote, my stomach heaving. When Michael came home, I showed him the tape. His face went pale. For once, he had no dismissive answer. "We're calling the police," he said quietly. The police arrived that afternoon, 2 uniformed officers who smelled faintly of coffee and cold air. I played the tape for them, and both men leaned forward, their expressions hardening. "That's enough for a warrant," one said. "We'll need to check the building's maintenance office." I didn't understand until later what he meant. Harris hadn't just been knocking. He'd stolen keys. From the building's office, he'd made copies, dozens of them. Not to steal jewelry or cash, no. His crime was worse, stranger. He had been entering apartments at night, standing silently in bedrooms, watching people sleep. When the police told us, my knees buckled. "He could have been in here?" The officer nodded grimly. He probably was. That night, Michael tried to reassure me. wrapping his arms around me as we lay in bed. But I couldn't close my eyes without picturing Harris at the foot of the bed, his silhouette in the doorway, his breath in the dark. Neighbors whispered in the hallways after his arrest. Some claimed they'd woken to find objects slightly moved in their kitchens, blankets pulled tighter around them in the night. Nobody had wanted to believe it, but the evidence was there. For me, the apartment was ruined. The walls felt contaminated, the locks useless. We broke our lease early, paying a penalty we couldn't afford. By spring, we had packed our boxes and fled Walnut Street, but leaving didn't free me. Even in new apartments, safer neighborhoods, I woke at 2 a.m. Sharp, heart pounding, ears straining for those 3 knocks. I developed rituals, checking locks 3 times, wedging chairs under doorknobs, leaving hallway lights on. Michael called it paranoia. I called it survival. Our marriage strained under the weight of my fear. He tried, but he couldn't understand the way Harris had burrowed into my mind. For him, it was over once Harris was in custody. For me, it would never truly end. Even now, years later, with kids of my own, students old enough to graduate, I sometimes find myself standing at the door in the middle of the night, staring at the peephole, waiting. I never see anyone. But in my head, the tape still plays. Harris leaning close, smiling into the lens, as though he'd always known I'd be watching. The danger that unsettles us most isn't always the violent break-in or the loud intrusion. It's the quiet trespass, the subtle invasion of trust and safety. Evil often hides behind politeness, routine, or familiarity, and by the time we notice, it has already entered our lives. The lesson is this: when your instincts whisper that something is wrong, listen. Dismissing fear doesn't erase it, it only gives it more time to grow. When people ask what changed me, I don't say Rachel's death. Not directly. I say it was what came after, the hollow space it carved out of me, the gnawing fear that whatever good was left in my life would vanish too. Rachel had been my high school sweetheart, the kind of woman who could calm a storm with a touch. We married young, built a modest home together in Ohio, and welcomed our daughter Lena into a world that suddenly felt brighter than I'd ever imagined. Life was never flashy, but it was good. It was ours. Then, one afternoon in 2009, Rachel collapsed in our kitchen. A burst aneurysm, the doctors said. 1 minute she was laughing about how bad my grilled cheese looked. The next she was gone. No warning. No second chance. Lena was 5. She asked questions I couldn't answer. Where's Mommy now? Why didn't she say goodbye? I had no words that would make sense to a child. I didn't even have words for myself. Grief didn't just break me, it rewired me. I became obsessed with keeping Lena safe. I locked every door twice. I called the school daily. I refused to let her walk alone, ride her bike outside the driveway, or go to birthday parties without me sitting in the corner like a watchdog. Lena grew, but I stayed frozen in that fear. By the time she was 10, she had learned to roll her eyes and slam doors when my rules became too heavy. "Dad, you're smothering me," she'd yell. And my answer was always the same. "You don't understand how quickly everything can be taken." It wasn't just paranoia, it was lived experience. Our neighborhood, Cedarbrook Drive, was the kind of place people call safe. Ranch-style homes lined the street like soldiers in uniform, hedges trimmed neatly, mailboxes shining in the summer sun. But I never trusted appearances. Safety, I knew, was just a curtain pulled across a window. And curtains can shift. The McKinneys lived next door. They were in their 60s, childless, retired. They waved every morning from their porch and invited us over for lemonade in the summer. At first I thought their presence was a blessing. Lena was lonely and she liked them. Mrs. McKinney baked cookies, the kind that filled the whole block with the smell of sugar and cinnamon. Mr. McKinney tinkered in his garage, fixing old tools and radios. They seemed harmless. But small things began to unsettle me. Lena would come home and say things like, "Mrs. McKinney asked how I liked the peanut butter sandwich today." I'd frown. How did she know what Lena ate for lunch? Or Lena would mention how Mr. McKinney had asked about the book she was reading in bed. She hadn't told them. I hadn't told them. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe Lena was exaggerating. Kids do that. Still, the unease settled in my bones. One afternoon I came home early from work and froze at the sight of my daughter sitting on their porch, swinging her legs and eating cookies. "Lena!" I barked, sharper than I intended. She jumped, the cookie crumbling in her hand. "Dad, it's fine. They're nice." I forced a tight smile at the McKinneys, who waved casually like nothing was wrong. Mr. McKinney's eyes lingered too long, though, watching me, then Lena, then me again. I guided her back across the yard, my hand firm on her shoulder. That night, I sat at our kitchen table staring at the blinds. I couldn't shake the thought that the McKinneys knew more about us than they should. I told myself I was imagining it, just my fear twisting shadows into monsters. But when Lena hugged me goodnight and whispered, "They make me feel normal, Dad," I felt torn in two. I wanted her to feel normal. I also wanted her alive. And in my mind, those two things were rarely the same. The summer of 2014 brought long evenings and restless arguments with Lena. She was 10 now, bold enough to challenge me at every turn. She wanted to ride her bike down the block alone, wanted to sleep over at her friend Katie's, wanted me to stop calling the school every day. "You don't trust me," she said one night, arms crossed at the dinner table. "It's not about trust," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about keeping you safe." "Safe from what? You think everyone's out to get me." I opened my mouth to argue, but then I saw Rachel's eyes in hers, brown and fierce. It stopped me cold. I caved one step at a time. First, I let her walk to the end of the street and back, as long as she checked in when she returned. Then, I let her stay home while I mowed the front yard. It felt like progress, even if it made my stomach twist. The McKinneys were always there, watching. Mrs. McKinney waved from her garden. Mr. McKinney leaned on his porch railing, a cigarette dangling from his lips. I told myself it was just coincidence, but it seemed like every time Lena stepped outside, their eyes followed. One evening, Lena pushed harder. "Dad, I'm not a baby. You have to let me stay home alone sometimes. Everyone in my class does." My chest tightened. Not everyone lost their mother overnight. Her face softened, then hardened again. "That's not fair." She stormed off, leaving me at the table with my guilt. That argument replayed in my head for days. I knew she was right in some ways. I was suffocating her. But the thought of losing her, of coming home to silence, was unbearable. Still, I couldn't hold her back forever. So one Saturday in July, I decided to take a step. I needed to grab groceries at Target. Lena begged to stay home. My gut screamed no, but my mouth said yes. "Just this once," I warned. "Lock the doors. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. And don't open the door for anyone," she finished, rolling her eyes. "Dad, I'm not dumb." I kissed her forehead and left, my heart hammering as I drove away. Halfway down an aisle of cereal boxes, my phone buzzed. I answered, breathless. "Dad!" Lena's voice shrieked through the line, tangled with static and panic. "Something..." A scream. Then the crash of shattering glass. My vision tunneled. I dropped everything and ran for the car, driving faster than I should have, praying out loud. Please, God, not her too. When I pulled into the driveway, my world tilted. The living room window was shattered inward. Lena was on the floor, blood streaking her arms, sobbing. "Daddy," she cried, and I scooped her up, my own tears blinding me. The McKinneys stood in their yard, Mr. McKinney holding a handgun, muttering about cleaning it. His wife stood behind him, silent, her eyes fixed on us like she was studying a play. I held Lena tight, rage boiling inside me. My greatest fear had come true. Not in the way I imagined, but close enough to break me. The police came, notebooks and flashlights in hand. The officer's tone was calm, too calm, as he wrote down Mr. McKinney's words. Accident, gun discharged while I was cleaning it. I wanted to scream. Accident? My daughter could have died. Lena sat wrapped in a blanket, an officer tending to the cuts on her arms. They weren't deep, thank God, but they were enough to scar. She clung to me, trembling. I glared at Mr. McKinney across the lawn. You point that thing at my house again, and I swear. Sir? An officer interrupted, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let us handle it. But I could see in their eyes. They didn't believe me, not really. To them it was just an old man with poor judgment. To me, it was a violation of everything I'd tried to protect. Mrs. McKinney stood behind her husband, silent as stone. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just watched, her face unreadable. The police filed their report. No charges. Unfortunate accident, they called it. That night, I sat awake with Lena asleep beside me on the couch, every muscle tight with fury. I wanted to pack our bags and leave Cedarbrook Drive forever. But where would we go? And what lesson would I be teaching Lena? That running was the only way to be safe? I poured myself coffee at 3 a.m. and stared at the curtains. I swore I saw them shift like someone was watching from outside. I wanted to believe it was just wind, but deep down, I knew better. Therapy wasn't something I wanted, it was something I needed. After the shooting, I realized fear had run my life for years. Fear of losing Lena, fear of making the wrong move, fear of the world outside our doors. The therapist asked me, "Do you believe you can keep your daughter safe by controlling her?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Then why did she get hurt under your watch?" The question cut deep. I hated her for asking it, but I couldn't escape the truth. My fear hadn't saved Lena. It had only shrunk her world, and mine. Over months of sessions, I learned to loosen my grip. I let Lena go to a friend's birthday. I stopped calling the school every day. I even let her walk to the park with friends, though I sat on the porch with my coffee, heart pounding until she returned. The scars on her arms faded, but they never disappeared. Neither did mine. The McKinneys kept their distance after the incident. I rarely saw them on the porch anymore. But every time I passed their house, I caught myself glancing at the curtains, half expecting them to shift. Lena was braver than me. "They don't scare me anymore," she said one evening. "You know what scares me? Living like I'm already trapped." Her words stuck. Maybe it was time to stop living in fear of shadows. Years later, Cedarbrook Drive looks the same. The lawns are still neat, the mailboxes still shine. Lena is a teenager now, taller than I am, her independence undeniable. She goes to the movies with friends, stays out at sleepovers, even rolls her eyes when I remind her to text me. And I let her. Not easily, not without fear, but I let her. The McKinneys moved away quietly the year after the shooting. Their house sits empty now, the curtains drawn. Sometimes when I pass by, I swear I see them shift, though no one lives there. Maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's memory. What I know is this: the world will never be safe. But it isn't meant to be lived behind locked doors either. Lena still has scars on her arms. I still have scars on my heart. But scars mean survival. They mean we're still here. And when she laughs now, free and unburdened, I know Rachel would be proud. Sometimes I sit on our porch with my coffee, staring at the empty McKinney house. I still wonder what was really hiding behind those curtains. But I don't let it cage me anymore. Because life, fragile as it is, has to be lived in the open. Fear can guard us, but if we let it rule us, it builds a prison around the people we love. True protection isn't about locking the world away. It's about giving our children the freedom to live, even when it scares us. Safety is never certain, but love means letting go enough to trust. When I look back on that summer of 2002, I can still feel the sticky heat pressing against the skin of my neck as Alex and I hauled our mismatched furniture up 3 flights of stairs. We were 28, newly married, still wearing that honeymoon sheen in public but already fraying behind closed doors. Money had become the language of every argument. Alex had been laid off from his IT job 2 months earlier. He called it temporary, but I could hear the doubt in his voice when he said it. My receptionist paycheck was just enough to keep the lights on and the rent paid, but the weight of being the only steady income gnawed at me. Every overdue bill turned into a fight. Every late notice taped to our door, another reminder that love doesn't pay the electric company. The apartment we settled into was nothing special. Just another box in a crumbling building on Ashford Court, Baltimore. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, buzzing fluorescent hallway lights that flickered like they were signaling some kind of warning. Water stains ran across the ceilings like veins, and the smell of mildew hung in the air vents no matter how many candles I lit. Still, it was all we could afford, so we told ourselves it was temporary. Our neighbors, the Wilsons, lived in 3B, right next to us. At first, they seemed perfectly ordinary, quiet, polite, the kind of couple you'd nod at when passing the mailbox. Mr. Wilson was tall and gaunt, with a limp that made his footsteps drag. Mrs. Wilson I barely saw, maybe once, waving from behind the blinds. Mostly, it was him. He carried trash bags down the stairs at odd hours, always avoiding eye contact. Alex joked one night while we unpacked, "They're probably vampires." He smirked at his own joke, and I laughed too loudly, desperate to feel like everything was normal. But normal was slipping. By September, the noises started, dragging sounds from the other side of the wall like furniture being pushed across hardwood, thuds that made me freeze mid-step, sometimes muffled sounds, something like crying, or maybe it was the plumbing. Alex dismissed it. "These walls are ancient," he said, flicking through TV channels. Could be rats, could be pipes. But his face was pale when he said it. The smell came slowly, sneaking in like an unwelcome guest. At first it was faint, sweet almost, the way flowers smell when they're just past their prime. Then it sharpened, sour, metallic, until it coated the back of my throat. It came through the vents at night. I'd crawl into bed, exhausted from work, and it would wrap around me, seeping into my sheets, clinging to my hair. No matter how much I scrubbed the apartment, it followed. Lysol, candles, bleach, nothing masked it. I remember snapping during one of our money fights. Alex had slammed a bill onto the kitchen table, shouting about late fees, and I screamed back, "I can't even breathe in this place anymore." He fired back, "Maybe it's not the place, maybe it's you." The silence afterward was worse than the yelling. He turned away, shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I wondered if our marriage had an expiration date. The smell only got stronger. It wasn't just in our apartment anymore. It seemed to trail us. At work, I caught my coworkers wrinkling their noses when I walked by. I started showering twice a day, scrubbing until my skin stung, but I couldn't shake it. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall. Behind the low hum of the building, I thought I heard something, a faint, broken sob. I pulled back, heart pounding. "Mrs. Wilson." "Alex," I whispered, shaking him awake. "Listen." He groaned, half asleep. "It's nothing. Go to bed." But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. Something was festering just feet away. By October, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The Wilsons' blinds stayed drawn day and night. I never saw Mrs. Wilson, only her husband, shuffling down with trash bags at 2 a.m. His eyes never met mine, but once I swore I saw a smear of something dark on his sleeve. I started avoiding the mailroom, afraid of running into him. Still, he always seemed to appear, giving me a small nod, a faint smile. I forced myself to smile back, though my stomach churned. Alex noticed my paranoia. "You're obsessing," he said one evening as I paced. "You're making stories up because you're unhappy here." "I'm not making it up," I snapped. "There's something wrong next door. Don't you smell it? Don't you hear it?" He rubbed his temples. "I hear bills piling up. I smell stress. That's what's rotting around here." His dismissal cut deep, but I couldn't let it go. I started writing down every sound I heard, every time the smell grew stronger. I even called the landlord once, my voice trembling. "There's something dead in 3B, I said. He sighed. Probably a rat in the walls. I'll check it out. But weeks passed, and nothing changed. It was mid-November when the landlord finally came. He knocked on the Wilsons' door, no answer. Knocked again, harder. Finally, he pulled out his keys. I stood in the hallway, Alex behind me, as the door creaked open. The smell hit first, a wave of decay so thick it made my eyes water. I gagged, covering my mouth, but it was too late. The air itself was poisoned. Inside, the apartment was dark, blinds drawn tight. Flies buzzed in swarms. And there, in the living room, the truth lay waiting. Mrs. Wilson's body. Months gone. Skin collapsed. Bones sharp against the thin couch cushions. She had been there the whole time, decaying while her husband lived beside her, eating meals, watching TV, carrying out trash as though nothing had changed. The police swarmed the building, their radios crackling. Mr. Wilson was led out in handcuffs, his face expressionless. He didn't fight, didn't cry. He just shuffled past me, the same way he had at the mailbox, and for one horrifying second his eyes met mine. He gave a small nod, the same nod he'd given me every week. I shivered so violently, Alex had to hold my arm. We moved within a month, but the damage followed us. The smell clung to me long after it was gone. Some nights I'd wake gasping, convinced it was seeping through invisible vents. Alex grew distant. "I can't do this anymore," he said one night. "You don't sleep. You don't eat. You stare at neighbors like they're monsters." "They could be," I whispered. But he didn't understand. Or maybe he did, and he couldn't bear it. By spring, he was gone. Our marriage, like the Wilsons' apartment, had rotted from the inside out. Even now, years later, I still catch myself watching the people next door. Curtains drawn, lights off, doors closed. It all makes my chest tighten, because I know now what silence can hide. And sometimes, on heavy summer nights when the air doesn't move, I swear I smell it again. That sickly sweet perfume of death drifting through unseen vents, reminding me that evil doesn't always come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it just sits quietly, rotting, right next to you. We tell ourselves we know our neighbors, that politeness and small talk are enough to judge someone's character. But the truth is, darkness can live quietly beside us, wearing the mask of ordinary life. Pay attention to the silences, the smells, the uneasy feelings you can't explain. Trust your instincts, because sometimes the most terrifying things aren't strangers. They're the people living just feet away. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Emma left. It sounds like a short amount of time, but grief plays tricks with the clock. Some mornings felt like years, others felt like hours. The apartment didn't look much different. Same furniture, same chipped coffee mugs, same blinds half stuck when I tried to pull them down. But it felt bigger. Too big. And cold, as if her leaving had sucked the warmth from the walls. I'd sit in the kitchen, staring at my mug of coffee, the one I always poured for her still sitting across from mine out of habit. I could hear echoes of our fights in the hum of the fridge. "You never listen to me, David," she'd yell, her voice sharp, cutting. "I'm trying, Emma. I really am," I'd plead, my voice cracking like a boy's, begging her to see the effort. But effort wasn't enough. She packed her things one rainy Thursday and walked out the door. The slam of it still haunted my dreams. At first I thought solitude would be a kind of freedom. No arguments, no accusations. But silence, I learned, is its own kind of punishment. That's when I noticed Elena. She lived in the small blue house across the narrow street, the one with ivy crawling up the siding. At first, she was just part of the scenery. I'd see her watering plants, waving politely if our eyes met. But one morning, I found a casserole dish on my doorstep, still warm. A note taped on top in neat cursive. "You deserve someone who really sees you." I chuckled nervously, unsure what to make of it, but I brought it inside anyway. After weeks of eating takeout and cold cereal, the casserole felt like a blessing. Elena started waving more often, lingering on her porch to chat about nothing. The weather, her cat Jasper, how the mail always seemed to get mixed up. She had a calming presence, soft voice, kind eyes. For the first time in weeks, I caught myself smiling. I told myself she was just being neighborly. But in the quiet nights, when loneliness pressed in too close, I thought, finally someone notices me. The comfort didn't last. It shifted slowly into something else. One night I woke to the creak of my bedroom door. My heart thudded hard in my chest as I stared into the dark. The door stood slightly ajar. I told myself I must have left it that way, but unease crawled under my skin. Through the thin curtains I saw movement across the street. Elena's window. She stood there in a red dress, staring out. The moonlight caught her smile, but her eyes, they didn't match. They were wide, almost unblinking. I yanked the blanket tighter, whispering, "It's nothing, just my imagination." But it didn't feel like nothing. Days later, I heard glass shatter downstairs. My phone shook in my hand as I dialed 911, but before I could press the call button, a voice floated up the stairs. Calm. Too calm. "David, I just wanted to be close." I froze. She stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding the broken remains of a vase. Not angry, not violent, just wrong. "Elena, you can't just come in here," I shouted, fear scratching my throat. "I know," she whispered. I couldn't help myself. I reported it to the landlord, even thought about calling the police. But then the casserole dish appeared again, fresh and warm, as though nothing had happened. I couldn't leave it alone. Curiosity mixed with fear until it became obsession. I asked around. The mailman, old Mrs. Green at the corner store, even the guy who fixed cars out of his driveway down the street. Everyone had something to say, but no one wanted to say it loud. "Her husband," they whispered. "Mr. Alvarez. Dead. Years ago. Mysterious circumstances. Some claimed it was illness. Others said they'd seen him pounding on the windows, screaming, before vanishing." I replayed that detail in my mind late at night, pounding on windows. One evening I stood outside pretending to smoke a cigarette I didn't want when Elena called across the street. "You okay, David?" She wore the red dress again, holding a casserole dish. Her smile was perfect, but her hand trembled. "I'm fine," I muttered. My voice didn't sound like mine. That night I dreamed of Emma and Elena together. Emma's eyes sad, Elena's smile too wide, both of them staring at me like I'd failed them. I woke drenched in sweat. The noises started after that. Soft whispers when the street was quiet, shadows shifting across my walls. I'd sit up in bed, heart hammering, certain someone was outside my window. Once I saw movement in Elena's window again. Only this time there was another figure behind her, half hidden by the curtain. A man. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Gone. I wanted to run, to move, to pack my things and leave the apartment that had become a stage for madness. But fear is a chain, and loneliness is heavier than any lock. One night I caught myself waiting by the window, waiting for her shadow, for the flash of red fabric, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. When she appeared, smiling, I almost waved back. Almost. It's been months now. Emma's absence is still heavy, but Elena has filled the silence in her own twisted way. I don't have visitors anymore. Friends stopped calling. My family gave up after too many ignored invitations. But I'm not sure I'm alone. Not really. Every time I close the blinds, I feel her eyes. Every time I turn off the lights, I hear the faint scrape of glass, the whisper of my name. And sometimes, when the night is too still, I see that second figure in her window again. The one who looks like a man. The one who doesn't move unless I blink. I tell myself I'm imagining it. That grief has rotted my mind, but deep down, I wonder if Emma left me only to make space for Elena, for whatever she keeps in that house across the street. I whisper into the dark. Am I really alone, or just waiting for something to notice me? No answer, just silence. And yet, I swear, I hear footsteps in the hall. Loneliness blinds us to danger. In the ache of being unseen, we mistake obsession for affection and attention for care. True healing doesn't come from those who creep into our lives uninvited, but from rebuilding trust in ourselves. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't being alone, it's letting the wrong person in. Cedar Grove Lane wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. At least that's what I believed for most of my life. It was a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, freshly painted fences, kids riding bikes until dusk, neighbors who waved every time you drove by. The kind of street where dads grilled burgers on weekends and moms organized block parties in the summer. To me, it was home, a bubble of safety I thought was unbreakable. I was 16 in October of 2019, a lanky kid with too long hair and a habit of chewing my nails when I was nervous. My parents, Karen and Peter, were strict in the way most parents were. Curfews, chores, lectures about responsibility. But they also trusted me enough to give me small freedoms. That Friday, October 18th, they were heading into the city for a friend's wedding, leaving me in charge of the house and our 2 golden retrievers, Benny and Max. Before they left, my mom fussed over every detail. "Don't forget to lock the doors, Lucas," she said, tugging her coat closed. "I know, Mom. I'm not 5, I replied, trying to sound confident. Dad chimed in from the doorway. "Make sure you take the dogs out before bed. They'll get restless if you don't." I nodded, pretending not to be nervous. Truth was, I'd been looking forward to the night. A whole house to myself, no parents checking in, just me, the dogs, and a stack of horror movies. I microwaved popcorn, grabbed a soda, and sprawled on the couch with Benny and Max flopped on either side of me like warm, furry bookends. The first hour passed exactly as I hoped. Movies flickered on the TV, the dogs snored softly, and outside the street was still. But around 9, Benny lifted his head. His ears perked, body stiff. Then the low, steady growl rumbled from his chest. I muted the TV. "What is it, boy?" Max joined in, barking sharply, claws scraping against the hardwood as he bolted toward the back door. I followed, heart thudding, and that's when I saw her. A thin woman crouched at the back window, hair tangled, eyes shining in the porch light. She smelled faintly of cigarettes even through the glass. Her voice came soft, almost childlike. "Can I pet them?" I froze, stomach lurching. "No, get away!" I shouted, slamming the door and twisting the lock. My hands shook as the dogs barked furiously, their teeth bared at the glass. The woman didn't argue. She just stood, head tilted, before slipping back into the shadows of the yard. My heart hammered. Cedar Grove Lane wasn't supposed to be like this. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was drunk, wandering home from somewhere. But Benny and Max wouldn't calm down. They paced, barking at the windows, hackles raised. I gripped the baseball bat Dad kept in the corner of the living room, my sweaty palms slipping against the handle. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. The dogs went wild, their barks deafening. I crept toward the front door, bat raised, every step heavy. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. The porch was empty. The streetlights buzzed and the wind rustled the trees. I whispered, "No way." Then came the clicking. A soft, deliberate sound at the kitchen window like fingers testing the lock. My blood ran cold. "Mom, Dad, please come home," I muttered, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. The clicking stopped. Silence stretched on, broken only by the dogs' growls. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? There's a woman outside, but she's gone now. No proof. No crime. I thought of Mr. Thompson, our retired neighbor who always warned me about safety. It's never the nice houses, Lucas, it's the quiet ones where people let their guard down. His words twisted in my head like a prophecy. The rest of the night stretched like an eternity. Shadows flickered across the yard. The woman's silhouette appeared, then disappeared, lingering just out of reach. Benny and Max never stopped barking, their bodies tense, eyes fixed on the darkness. I sat on the couch, bat across my lap, trying to stay awake, every creak of the house making my skin crawl. By 11, exhaustion dragged at me, but fear kept me wired. The woman hadn't spoken again, but her presence pressed on me like a weight. Every time I thought she was gone, the dogs proved me wrong. They lunged at the back door, barking so fiercely I thought they'd shatter the glass. I dared a peek through the blinds. She was there. Standing at the edge of the yard, thin frame lit faintly by the street lamp. Her head tilted, arms limp at her sides, watching the house, watching me. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered to no one. The worst part was the quiet. She didn't try to break in. She didn't yell. She just stood there, patient, like she had all the time in the world. I texted my parents, "Please come home soon. Something's wrong." No reply. Probably dancing, phones forgotten. The dogs barked until they were hoarse, then growled, low and steady, eyes never leaving the yard. I tried distracting myself with the TV, but the flickering screen only made the shadows dance more. At one point I thought I saw her closer, almost against the fence, fingers curled around the wood. I blinked and she was gone. Midnight. My phone read 12:07, then 12:14, then 12:29. Time dragged. I sat curled on the couch, bat still across my lap, dogs pressed against my legs. Their warmth grounded me, but their constant tension made me shiver. They were ready to fight, and I knew they were braver than I was. Every sound outside felt amplified. A branch snapping, leaves crunching, the faint scrape of metal against glass. I swore I heard footsteps circling the house, deliberate and slow. I thought about calling the police again. But what if they came and found nothing? Would they laugh? Would my parents be furious? So I sat, waiting, heart pounding with every shadow that stretched across the lawn. At 1:02 a.m., headlights washed across the living room, my parents' car. Relief hit so hard I almost cried. They opened the door to chaos, dogs barking, me pale and shaking, the bat still in my hands. "Lucas, what happened?" Mom gasped, rushing to me. There was a woman, at the window, at the door. She tried to get in." My words tumbled out, frantic. Dad scanned the room, jaw tight. "You did the right thing, son. You kept the house safe." They called the police, who arrived 20 minutes later. Officers searched the yard, the street, even the neighbors' lawns. No footprints, no forced locks, nothing. Just the silence of a neighborhood that looked too perfect to hide something so wrong. But I knew what I saw. Benny and Max knew too. They still stood at the back door, teeth bared, staring into the empty yard as if she was still there. For weeks I couldn't sleep without checking every lock, every window. The dogs became hypervigilant, barking at the faintest sound. Cedar Grove Lane didn't feel safe anymore. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I swear I see her silhouette at the fence. Thin, watching, waiting for her chance. Safety is never guaranteed, not even in the quietest places. We convince ourselves danger happens somewhere else to someone else, but that illusion makes us careless. Real safety isn't in the neighborhood or the locks. It's in staying aware, trusting instincts, and never ignoring the warning signs, even when others might doubt them. When Laura and I signed the papers for the house on Willow Creek Drive, I remember thinking, this is it. This is where our kids will grow up. This is where we'll grow old together. After years of renting cramped apartments and duplexes, we finally had a place that was ours. 4 bedrooms, a backyard big enough for the kids, even a pool. It wasn't the fanciest house in the neighborhood, but to us, it felt like winning the lottery. Laura practically floated through the kitchen as she unpacked boxes. "I swear this place feels like it was made for us." I laughed, setting another box on the counter. "Just don't let the kids jump into the pool without life jackets." That first week, everything felt like a dream. Lily, 10, and Max, 7, spent hours chasing each other barefoot across the grass. Laura fussed with her rose bushes, humming to herself. And I mowed the lawn for the first time, feeling more like a proper dad than I had in years. The neighbors waved as they walked their dogs, and for once I didn't feel like an outsider. Every night, Laura and I sat on the back porch with iced tea while the kids splashed in the pool. It was the picture of suburban peace. I caught myself thinking, maybe this really is forever. But looking back now, I realize how fragile that peace was. One night was all it took to shatter it completely. It was October 14th, just after 11 at night. The kids were asleep upstairs, Laura was curled next to me in bed, and the house was wrapped in that familiar, comfortable silence. That's when I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel on the driveway. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe a stray cat, maybe the wind. I almost rolled back over. But then I saw them. 4 men in black masks, flashlights slicing through the dark as they approached our windows. I bolted upright, shaking Laura. "Laura, wake up!" Her eyes opened groggily. "What is it?" "They're here. Someone's outside," I whispered, already pulling on my jeans. Before she could respond, the front door rattled, then slammed open with a crack that echoed through the house. The kids stirred upstairs, their voices faint, confused. My heart leapt into my throat. The men moved fast, tall, dressed in black, crowbars in hand. They didn't sneak, they stormed. One shoved me against the wall, the cold metal of the crowbar pressing against my chest. "Where is it?" he barked, eyes flashing behind his mask. I stammered. "Where's what?" "We don't have anything. Please." Laura rushed down the stairs, Max clutched in her arms, Lily trailing behind with tears streaking her face. The sight of them made my knees buckle. "Please, you're scaring the children," Laura cried, her voice breaking. The leader snarled, pressing a knife against Laura's side. "Tell us where it is or she gets hurt." I threw up my hands, panic clawing at my throat. "I swear we don't know what you're talking about." They tore through the house like a storm. Drawers ripped open, cabinets emptied, framed photos shattered on the floor. The kids sobbed while I tried to shield them, helpless. The men muttered to each other, frustrated, angry. Finally, the leader cursed under his breath. "This isn't it. Wrong house." And just like that, they were gone. The door banged shut, their footsteps fading into the night. I collapsed onto the floor, trembling, as Laura gathered the kids in her arms. Nothing was stolen, nothing but our sense of safety. The police arrived within the hour, lights flashing across our quiet cul-de-sac. Officers walked through the wreckage of our living room, their radios crackling. One of them, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, pulled me aside. "Looks like they mistook your house for someone else's, probably after cash or drugs. It happens sometimes." I stared at him, stunned. "It happens sometimes? What about my family, my kids?" He sighed. "You're lucky it didn't get worse. Replace your locks. Get a security system, that's all you can do." Lucky. That word rattled around in my head all night. The next morning, the house looked normal from the outside. Neighbors waved, kids rode bikes. But inside, it was a war zone. Broken glass, overturned furniture, the lingering smell of sweat and fear. Laura moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her eyes red. "I can't believe someone would just break in like that." "We're okay. We survived. That's what matters," I said, though my voice felt hollow. Lily refused to sleep in her room, curling into our bed every night. Max flinched at every creak. I tried to be strong, but my chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. Weeks passed, but the fear didn't fade. Every sound at night sent me bolting upright. Every car that slowed on the street made my stomach twist. I installed cameras, alarms, new locks. None of it eased the dread. Laura cried quietly when she thought I wasn't looking. She tried to garden, but her hands shook. Lily stopped playing outside. Max asked me every night, "Dad, are they coming back?" "No," I always answered, even though I wasn't sure myself. The house we dreamed of became a cage. Even small things, getting the mail, taking the trash out, felt risky. The neighbors gave us sympathetic looks, but sympathy didn't fix the feeling of being watched. One night, Laura whispered in bed, "Do you think we'll ever feel safe here again?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. Months later, the house looked put together again. New locks, new furniture, alarms blinking green. But the scars weren't on the walls. They were in us. The kids slept in our room more often than not. Laura jumped at shadows. And me? I found myself staring out the windows at night, scanning the cul-de-sac for movement. I'd tell myself, it's just the wind. It's just a car. But then I'd see it. Shadows lingering by the fence, shapes that didn't belong. Maybe my imagination. Maybe not. One night, Lily asked softly, "Dad, do you think they'll come back?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart, but we'll be ready if they do." The truth is, I didn't know. And maybe that's the worst part. Not the break-in itself, but the uncertainty it left behind. The feeling that someone could come crashing through our lives at any moment and all we could do was wait. We build our lives on the belief that home equals safety. But safety isn't guaranteed, not by locks, alarms, or quiet neighborhoods. What matters most is resilience, the strength to protect, to comfort, and to keep moving forward even after fear has invaded your walls. Because in the end, safety isn't about where you live. It's about who you face the darkness with. When Jenna and I first moved into Maplewood Drive, I thought we'd finally found the kind of neighborhood people dream about. The lawns were neatly trimmed, kids rode bikes in the afternoons, and every house looked like it had been plucked straight from a suburban postcard. After years of cramped apartments and noisy streets, we'd landed in a place where mornings smelled like fresh-cut grass and evenings were quiet enough to hear the crickets. We were in our mid-30s then, newly married, trying to start fresh after a rocky first few years together. I had taken a job in logistics, which meant long hours but steady pay. Jenna worked part-time at the local library. Life was comfortable, predictable, safe. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. Our neighbors seemed ordinary enough. Across the street lived the Martins, an older couple who always argued about their mailbox leaning slightly crooked. 2 houses down was a young family with twin toddlers. And then there was Tom. Tom lived directly next door. Early 40s, clean cut, always in pressed shirts even on weekends. He waved every morning when he got his paper, sometimes stopped for small talk. "Morning, Marcus, how's work?" Or, "Nice weather for grilling." The kind of neighbor you barely noticed but appreciated for being polite. If you'd asked me then, I would have said Tom was boring in the best possible way. The kind of guy who blended into the background, reliable, harmless. But it was in the spring of our second year on Maplewood Drive that I first heard it. The dull, rhythmic banging coming from his garage at night. At first I brushed it off. People have hobbies, I told myself. Maybe he was fixing up an old car. Maybe he was a night owl who liked to build furniture. Jenna wasn't so sure. One evening, while we sipped coffee in the kitchen, the sound drifted through the open window. Bang, bang, bang. Steady, unnatural. Too late for normal work. "Marcus," Jenna said quietly, setting her mug down. "It sounds different, doesn't it?" I forced a laugh. Probably just some late-night project. Nothing serious. But the look on her face unsettled me. And the truth was, the more I listened, the less it sounded like work. Weeks passed, and the banging became routine. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I started noticing the pattern. Always after midnight, sometimes going until 3 or 4 in the morning. Then came the cries. The first time I heard them, I thought I was dreaming. A faint, muffled sound, like someone calling from underwater. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a raccoon stuck somewhere. But the next night, it happened again. Louder. Longer. I remember Jenna clutching my arm. "Marcus, you hear that, right?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I hear it." The following evening, I decided to bring it up casually. I leaned on the fence while Tom watered his lawn. "Hey, Tom. Everything okay with the garage? Been hearing a lot of noise lately." He froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a smile. Yeah. Just working on a project, you know? Car stuff. Gets loud sometimes." I wanted to press him, but his tone was so dismissive, so practiced, that I felt foolish. I nodded, pretending I believed him. But that night, the noises came again. Banging, scraping, then unmistakable sobs. Jenna sat up in bed, pale. "Marcus, that's a person. That's not just noise." I tried to calm her, though my own stomach churned. Maybe it's the TV, maybe. But the excuses felt thin even as I said them. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By July, the noises had become unbearable. I started losing sleep, lying awake until dawn, waiting for the next sound. Jenna begged me to do something. "You can't just ignore it, Marcus. What if someone's in trouble?" One night around 2 a.m, the banging was louder than ever, followed by a cry that chilled me to the bone. Not just a noise, a voice, a woman's voice. That was the breaking point. My hands shook as I dialed 911. "This is Marcus Doyle, 42 Maplewood Drive. There's something happening in my neighbor's garage. I think someone's in there." The dispatcher asked calm questions, but my words stumbled. All I knew was that if I didn't act now, I might regret it forever. Minutes later, flashing lights painted the street red and blue. 2 officers walked to Tom's garage. He appeared at the door, hair disheveled, voice calm. "Officers, what's going on?" "Sir, we've had a noise complaint," one officer said. "We'll need to check the garage." Tom hesitated, just a second too long. My gut twisted. "Of course," he said finally, fumbling with the lock. The officers pried open the door, and what they revealed froze me where I stood. A woman sat bound to a chair in the middle of the garage, rope dug into her wrists. A gag muffled her sobs. Her eyes were wide, terrified, yet shining with relief at the sight of the officers. "Oh my God," Jenna whispered behind me, clutching my arm. "It's her. She's the woman from the news." She was right. I recognized her face from missing posters taped around town. She'd been gone for months. My stomach turned. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The officers rushed forward, cutting the ropes, wrapping her in a blanket. She sobbed. I didn't know if anyone would hear me. I didn't know if I'd ever get out. Tom stood by, his polite smile gone, replaced with a hollow stare. They cuffed him without resistance. His voice was low, almost detached. "It's not what it looks like." But of course it was exactly what it looked like. As they led him away, the woman clung to one officer, trembling. Thank you. Thank you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man I'd waved to every morning, chatted with about lawn care, had been hiding this horror just feet from where we lived. In the days after, Maplewood Drive didn't feel the same. Reporters swarmed the block. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The Martins shook their heads, muttering, "He seemed so normal." Jenna refused to step near the fence that divided our yards. Every time she looked at the garage, her hands trembled. "We lived right next to him," she said. "Right next to that." I replayed every interaction with Tom in my mind. The smiles, the small talk, the casual waves. They all felt like lies. At night I lay awake listening to the silence. But silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, like the pause before something terrible. When the wind rattled another neighbor's garage door, I bolted upright, heart racing. "How many more?" I whispered to myself. How many more people are hiding behind smiles like his? Maplewood Drive still looks perfect on the outside, but to me, it will never be the same. Evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it wears a smile, waves good morning, and mows its lawn like everyone else. We convince ourselves that monsters live far away, but often, they're closer than we dare to believe. Listen to instincts, to trust unease, and to speak up when something feels wrong. Because silence is what allows darkness to thrive. Right next door. When my parents split up, Chloe and I moved into our aunt's old house on Maple Street. It was the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Peeling white paint, a sagging porch swing, and a backyard where weeds had been left unchecked. Aunt June had passed 2 years prior, and the house sat empty until Mom decided she needed a fresh start. I was 17, Chloe 21, and neither of us had asked for this arrangement. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital, so most nights it was just Chloe and me. She tried to make the best of it, ordering takeout, blasting music in the kitchen, telling me it was like an extended sleepover. But the truth was, she resented giving up her apartment downtown to babysit her younger brother. And I resented being treated like a responsibility. From my bedroom upstairs, I had a view of the street. Across the road stood a house much larger than ours, with a massive bay window dominating the front. Even in daylight, it had a presence, shutters hanging uneven, paint faded, glass coated with dust. The yard was overgrown, and no one ever seemed to come or go. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a week, I noticed something odd. At night, when the street lamps hummed and threw pale light across the road, I would catch shadows in that window. Shapes that didn't move like curtains or tricks of light. Someone sitting there, watching. The first night I blinked and dismissed it. The second night I convinced myself it was just my imagination. By the third, when the shape returned in the same spot, perfectly still, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't say anything to Chloe right away. She already teased me for being paranoid about noises in the house. But eventually, over dinner one night, I couldn't hold it in. "Are you seriously staring at your neighbor again?" she asked, stabbing her fork into cold spaghetti. "I'm not staring," I muttered. "There's someone in that window." She rolled her eyes. "You need sleep, that's all." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But deep down, I knew I'd seen him. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie in bed, staring at the curtains, waiting for the courage to peek. When I finally did, the figure was always there, upright, still, like a mannequin propped in the window. Finally, one night, I did something reckless. I raised my hand, gave a nervous little wave, and waited. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure raised his hand and waved back. My heart slammed against my ribs. I ripped the curtains shut and pressed my back to the wall, trembling. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't some trick of the light. "You're seriously waving at a creepy guy across the street?" Chloe hissed when I told her the next morning. I don't know what to do," I admitted, hands shaking as I poured cereal. "Do nothing," she said. "Ignore it. Whoever it is, they'll get bored." But the thought gnawed at me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, in broad daylight, I pulled the curtains back. The window was empty. No figure. The glass was coated in dust. Weeds curled around the porch steps. No sign of anyone living there at all. Confused, I asked around the neighborhood. Most shrugged and said they didn't know much. Finally, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman 2 doors down, gave me an answer. "That house has been empty for months," she whispered, leaning close. "Ever since the previous owner disappeared." My blood ran cold. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a squatter had moved in. Maybe kids were daring each other to break inside. I even tried to convince myself it was just stress from the divorce, but then came the footsteps. At first I thought it was Chloe sneaking into my room, but when I turned on the lamp, the hallway outside my door was empty. Another night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing just beyond the curtain. When I yanked it open, nothing. Just the streetlight's glow, and that cursed bay window staring back. One night Chloe came into my room pale. "Okay," she admitted. "I heard it too. Footsteps. In my room." "You believe me now?" I whispered. She hugged herself. "I don't want to. But yeah." That night neither of us slept. We sat in the living room with every light on, pretending to watch TV. But I could feel him, or it, waiting across the street. A month later, a storm rolled through. Rain lashed the windows, thunder shook the house, and the wind howled through cracks in the siding. I tried to sleep, but something pulled me toward the window. There he was, sitting in the bay window across the street, perfectly still. But this time, something was different. The storm illuminated the house in flashes of lightning, and I realized the inside was empty. No furniture, no curtains, nothing but bare walls and that figure, darker than the shadows staring back. I stumbled away from the glass, heart pounding. Chloe burst into my room. "Did you see it?" she gasped. "Yes," I whispered. "He's still there." The power cut out, plunging us into darkness. From outside came the sound of shutters rattling, wood groaning, as though the house itself were alive. And beneath the thunder, faint but real, I heard it. A knock at our front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. We didn't answer the door. We didn't even breathe. We just sat together in the dark until the storm passed and morning light crept through the blinds. The next day, I checked the cameras I'd installed facing the street. My hands shook as I scrolled through the footage, and my stomach dropped when I saw it. The bay window across the street, empty. The house, silent. But our yard, our front porch, caught something. A figure, tall, thin, standing at the door, not moving, just standing. The timestamp said 2:37 a.m., exactly when we heard the knock. I deleted the footage, not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't want proof. Proof meant it was real. Proof meant he could come back. That night I moved my bed away from the window. Chloe refused to sleep upstairs at all. The house still stands across the street, silent and abandoned. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the shutters, I feel him, waiting, watching. And the most terrifying part? He might not have ever been human. Fear often hides in the ordinary. A window, a shadow, a noise in the night. We dismiss it, laugh it off, convince ourselves it's nothing. But sometimes the things we ignore are the ones that endanger us the most. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the unease in your gut. Because danger doesn't always knock loudly. It waits, quietly, watching, until you finally notice it's there. When Rachel and I bought our house on Willow Lane, I thought it was the beginning of something good. We'd been married for almost 9 years, together through thick and thin. But the last couple of years hadn't been easy. Work stress, late nights, disagreements that turned into shouting matches. Our marriage had been weathering storms. A new house felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the way things used to be. The first week we moved in, Rachel threw herself into the neighborhood. She baked pies, introduced herself to everyone on the block, and fussed over the garden. I took comfort in her excitement, even if I was too tired most nights to match her energy. That's when we met the Petersons. Their house sat right next to ours, a 2-story colonial with a pristine white picket fence and a perfectly trimmed yard. Mark, the husband, had that polished look about him. Button-down shirts, confident smile, handshake firm enough to make you feel small. His wife, Dana, was quieter, often seen shuffling kids from one activity to another. Mia, 8, and Toby, 6, were the picture of innocence. Sweet kids who played in the yard with Scout, their golden retriever, always laughing. "They're perfect," Rachel said one Sunday after inviting them for dinner. "I mean, look at them. That's what a family should look like." I forced a smile, but inside, something twisted. I couldn't help comparing. Rachel laughed at Mark's jokes too freely, and when she complimented his cooking during their so-called baking challenge, I felt a flash of envy I couldn't admit aloud. One Saturday, as Rachel chopped vegetables, I muttered, "You know, Mark's got the perfect life." "David," she said, sighing. "Stop. You sound ridiculous." But she didn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It was a seed of doubt, planted quietly, and like most seeds, it began to grow. The first sign that something wasn't right came in the form of 2 small knocks at our door. I opened it to find Mia and Toby standing there, their faces pale, their hands clenched together. We don't want to go home," Mia whispered. Rachel appeared at my side, concerned. "Why not, sweetheart?" It's scary there," Toby stammered, eyes darting nervously toward their house. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just childish imagination. Maybe they'd been watching scary movies. Maybe they were just trying to avoid bedtime. But their trembling hands, the way Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, it didn't feel like play acting. Rachel, of course, went into mother hen mode, sitting them down at the kitchen table, pouring them milk, offering cookies. She always had that instinct, the ability to comfort. The kids clung to her, but when I asked questions, they went silent. That night, Rachel said she was going over to help Dana with a baking project. I stayed behind, flipping through the newspaper, when a scream pierced the quiet. I froze, my heart hammering. Rushing to the window, I saw them, Rachel and Mark, standing under the dim glow of the Petersons' backyard lights. He was holding her hand, whispering something. She looked shaken. "What the hell?" I muttered, pressing against the glass. Upstairs, the curtains shifted. Mia and Toby's faces appeared in the window, pale and wide-eyed. Their lips moved silently. "Don't go over there." For the first time, I felt real fear. The Petersons' house became a puzzle I couldn't solve. By day, they looked flawless. Mark trimming the hedges, Dana smiling politely, Scout running in the yard. But the cracks were showing. The kids wouldn't talk about their father. Whenever his name came up, they froze, eyes darting nervously, voices caught in their throats. Rachel grew distant, her smiles forced. She came home from helping Dana looking exhausted, eyes red as if she'd been crying. At night, faint cries sometimes carried through the walls, muffled but undeniable. Scout would growl low, hackles raised, staring into the shadows of their yard. I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, I confronted Rachel. "What's really going on over there?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. She shook her head, tears welling. "David, I don't know how to explain. I thought I was helping them. I didn't know it was dangerous." Dangerous. The word sat heavy between us. The next day, I tried to confront Mark directly. I walked up to him as he trimmed his roses, my fists clenched. "You know your kids came to my house last week saying they were scared to go home?" I asked. He smiled, smooth and calm. "Kids say things, you know how imaginations run wild." But his eyes told another story. Cold, calculating, as if daring me to push further. I didn't, not then. Weeks passed and the silence grew heavier. Rachel avoided their house completely, refusing to answer when Dana called. The children grew more withdrawn, playing less, their laughter gone. Scout barked late at night, waking me with a start. I began noticing small things. A bruise on Dana's arm. The way she flinched when Mark put a hand on her shoulder. The way Mia clung to Rachel, whispering things too soft for me to hear. One night, lying in bed, Rachel whispered, "We can't just ignore this." "And what do you want me to do?" I snapped. "Call the cops?" "On what? A hunch? Kids acting scared? A bruise?" Her silence cut deeper than words. But I couldn't shake it. Every time I saw Mark wave across the fence, every time I caught his polite smile, I thought of the scream I'd heard that night, of the kids' pale faces in the window, of the whispered warning, "Don't go over there." Something was happening behind those walls. Something dark. And every day we stayed silent, it grew worse. It happened on a Thursday night. I woke to Scout barking violently, claws scraping against the fence. When I looked out, I saw a small figure dart across the yard. Mia, clutching Toby's hand, running toward our porch. Rachel and I rushed to let them in. They were shaking, whispering through tears. "We can't go back, please, and don't make us go back." Before I could respond, a shadow appeared at the fence. Mark. His silhouette loomed under the streetlight, perfectly calm. "Evening, David," he called, voice steady. "Looks like my kids wandered off. I'll take them home now." The children clung tighter to Rachel, screaming, "No!" I stood frozen, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to protect them. For the first time I saw it clearly. The mask was gone. His eyes were sharp, dangerous, predatory. That night changed everything. We called the police. Investigations began. Whispers spread across the neighborhood. The Petersons' perfect facade collapsed, though the truth of what happened inside that house was never fully known. But even now, years later, sometimes I wake at night and hear soft footsteps just beyond the fence. Scout growling in the dark. And I wonder, did we ever really escape what lived next door? Evil rarely shows its true face. Sometimes it hides behind charm, behind laughter, behind a picture-perfect family. We tell ourselves it isn't our business, that it's safer to stay silent. But silence feeds the darkness. If something feels wrong, don't look away. Speak up, protect the vulnerable. Because the greatest danger isn't what happens behind closed doors. It's when good people choose not to act.